Welcome to the FDA Group Insider Newsletter number 21 for December. This is Nancy Angus Edge, regulatory consultant, and here to discuss topic number one. Our first topic number one, is the remote interactive evaluations of drug manufacturing and bioresearch monitoring facilities guidance. This September 2023 guidance actually follows the COVID-19 pandemic guidance because during the COVID-19 pandemic, the FDA had decided to use alternative remote tools and information to support regulatory decisions and oversight of facilities. Now, while inspections have resumed post-COVID-19, the FDA has determined that this continued use of the alternative tool discussed in the guidance for September 2023 includes, again, remote interactive evaluations based on risk and programming needs that will further enhance the ability to assess manufacturing facilities. Note that not only are remote interactive evaluations here to stay, but they're actually more demanding and require more stringent record keeping compared to the original COVID-19 guidance. Here to stay. The remote interactive evaluation guidance is based on drug manufacturing and bioresearch monitoring facility guidances. This draft guidance, which is like the COVID-19 RIE guidance from 2019, states that the FDA will consider using RIEs in the future, especially for pre-approval inspections, post-approval inspections, surveillance inspections, and of course, bioresearch monitoring organization inspections. The remote regulatory assessment is very important, and the RIEs, or remote interactive evaluations, are a type of remote regulatory assessment, or RRA. The FDA has developed this concept of RRAs very early on during the COVID pandemic. And after the FDA suspended most of its domestic and foreign inspection programs due to COVID health risks, this RRA became essential. They use this term RRA to refer to essentially any remotely conducted FDA examination of any FDA-regulated facility, and even includes the records to evaluate compliance with applicable FDA requirements. The RRA may consist of or include a request to conduct the voluntary remote interactive evaluation. Now, a request by the FDA under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act actually is called Section 704A4, and it concerns the records or information that the FDA is most interested in collecting. Now, the FDA's use of this remote interactive evaluation is very important because depending on the purpose and the outcome of this evaluation, the information and documentation collected by the FDA during the voluntary RIE may be used for different regulatory purposes, including support for the FDA's assessment of pending applications, including whether to approve the application or preclude the need for an inspection and follow-up to a reported concern or defect, or even support a regulatory meeting or a warning letter or an import alert, recall activities, or enforcement actions. And it can also be used to rank or prioritize a facility for an inspection, especially a surveillance CGMP inspection. And it can also justify a follow-up or compliance inspection for any other kind of surveillance activity. Now, the FDA will send out a notice of request to perform the remote interactive evaluations, and this will be done by electronic correspondence or even by a phone call if the FDA has chosen to use the remote interactive evaluation. And they will request that the company confirm willingness to participate in the evaluation. The agency will then work with the company to plan and coordinate what those evaluation activities are. Now, even though this is voluntary, declining the FDA's request to perform a remote interactive evaluation could impede the ability to make a timely regulatory decision. Now, an example would be regarding the adequacy of a clinical trial used in supporting a pending application or the adequacy of a drug manufacturing operation described in the application. So compliance is really important. And the previous COVID-19 RIE guidance indicated that after the conclusion of the RIE, the FDA would always provide the facility with a copy of the final report. But the new draft RIE guidance from 2023 indicates the FDA may not always do so. So it's very important for companies to ask for the final RIE report. And this change was likely made to be consistent with the FDA's clarification in a subsequently issued related guidance called Conducting Remote Regulatory Assessments, Questions and Answers from July 2022. and it's consistent with the FDA's practice for mandatory inspections. Now, the FDA will provide the establishment with a written copy of the narrative portion of the RRA report following the determination that the RRA is closed as described in 21 CFR 505 2064. So you can see that cooperation with this FDA FIE request is very important, because if the establishment refuses the voluntary RIE request, the FDA then uses other tools for evaluating compliance. And this may include potentially an unannounced mandatory in-person inspection as soon as the FDA is able. The draft RIE guidance from 2023 also notes, as did the previous COVID-19 RIE guidance, that declining the FDA's request to perform a voluntary RIE could impede the FDA's ability to make a timely decision, which then, of course, slows down the approval process. So conforming with RIE is important because the pharmaceutical firms are obviously impacted by the guidance. So you have to commit the same level of importance and attention as you would for an in-person inspection. You have to clarify with the FDA lead any requests that you don't fully understand or will require submission of a particularly high volume of records. Be sure in advance to organize all your requested documents in an easy to understand format. Have your subject matter experts or consultants available ahead of time to explain operations and answer questions. Now, the remote interactive evaluations are technology and platform dependent. So you have to check to make sure both are sufficiently updated and responsive and they actually work. Considerations are this: make sure that your remote connection, that is connectivity, image quality, camera use, must be adequate for the FDA to remotely review, observe, examine, and evaluate the information requested. Also, your technologies that are used must allow for clear and stable remote viewing and the evaluation of the operations at the facility, such that you're actually able to see what are the aseptic practices, what does equipment cleaning and setup look like, material weighing and dispensing, instrument setup, sampling, testing. And for security reasons, the FDA uses its own IT platforms and equipment to host virtual interactions, whether they are video conferences or live streaming video of the facilities and the operations. The FDA uses their own conferencing platforms. They're known as FDA Microsoft Teams, FDA Zoom for Government, and FDA Adobe Connect. So, just be aware in advance that you should have your technological assets in place early on. And the most important part is that the RIEs and other forms of RRAs will be permanent parts of the FDA's inspection and oversight program. So just plan in advance. You should have those SOPs in place. You should have your policies and procedures on how to participate in your RRAs, because any delays can result in a delayed approval. And so efficiency is important. Make sure that the SOPs also are written on how to respond to any findings that the FDA makes during an RIA or any other type of RRIE. Now, the pre-approval inspections are done when the FDA cannot perform a PAI or PLI, and it's useful to supplement a planned inspection or when it's determined that facility risk can be assessed and application assessments can be completed without inspection. Now, tools other than inspections can be used for this pre-approval inspection called a PAI. Therefore, the FDA may request a remote interaction with the facility which will assess risk identified during the application review, or they can request remote interaction if there are no data integrity or other issues that the FDA would necessarily require an inspection for. In particular, this draft 2023 RIA guidance recommends reviewing the July 2022 and September 2023 draft guidances for information regarding what criteria the FDA may use to determine whether an RRA or other tools should be used. So going back and looking at these guidances is important. Now, in addition to the pre-approval process, there's the post-approval inspections. When the FDA cannot perform a post-approval inspection or when it would be useful to supplement a planned inspection, then the FDA may determine that a remote interactive evaluation is appropriate as an alternative to an inspection. The FDA may request this when a facility already has an acceptable inspection history with no data integrity concerns or other concerns that the FDA may determine requires an inspection, or Specific application considerations and CGMP manufacturing risks that warrant a post-approval inspection can be sufficiently assessed through the remote interactive evaluation process. So those are the scenarios you want to look at. Now, remember that this COVID RA guidance under FDORA extended to the bioresearch monitoring program as well. The COVID-19 remote interactive evaluation guidance noted that the FDA Section 704A requests for records and other information did not apply to FDA's BIMO inspection program, but the new draft 2023 RA guidance has deleted that note. So now the FDA Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, FDORA, extended the FDA Section 704A4, and now it is actually extended to the bioresearch monitoring inspections. So now that the COVID RIE guidance doesn't apply that in terms of the information didn't apply to BIMO, but now it does. So the FDA has authority under Section 704A1 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to enter establishments to inspect them at reasonable times. And the draft RIE guidance actually reiterates what was also stated in the COVID-19 RIE guidance, that generally a drug's facility's participation in a remote interactive evaluation and the facility's compliance with FDA respects made during an RIE are voluntary. But this is also challenging because this has to be done within reasonable limits in a reasonable manner, and the FDA generally has not determined that this grants the FDA the authority to conduct mandatory inspections through entirely remote means. However, and this should be noted carefully, compliance with a valid Section 704 request is mandatory. So, what are the future implications of remote interactive evaluations of drug manufacturing? Well, since future remote interactive evaluations and other forms of RIAs will be permanent parts of FDA inspection and oversight programs, then companies moving forward should plan accordingly. Companies should have in place their standard operating procedures, not just for inspections, but also for any kind of remote interactive evaluation or remote regulatory appraisals. These SOPs have to include policies and procedures on how to participate in these remote regulatory assessments. Any delays can result in delayed approval of a drug or biologic, making efficiency important. So you should also have SOPs in place on how to respond to any findings that FDA makes during an RIA. And also have in line not only your technical capabilities, but also have your subject matter experts and your consultants in place well in advance. I appreciate your attention to topic number 1. And I also wanted to provide you with some references because obviously there was the previous COVID-19 remote interactive evaluation guidance found in 2021, but this new FDA draft guidance, which is conducting remote regulatory assessments, questions and answers, is actually really important and very informative. And then the FDA draft guidance itself for September 2023 is also extremely important. I appreciate your attention to this matter, and now we're going to move on to topic number 2. Thanks so much, and have a great day.
Hello everyone, my name is Regina Atem. For item number 2, I will be discussing cybersecurity, specifically the 2023 FDA issued final guidance on pre-market cybersecurity quality system considerations for medical devices. In this section, I will be discussing the key components of the 2023 FDA final guidance on pre-market cybersecurity quality system considerations for medical devices. So this final guidance introduces the Secure Product Development Framework, SPDF. It addresses cybersecurity transparency and includes an appendix that provides cybersecurity documentation requirements for IDE submissions. It also provides the cybersecurity requirements for artificial intelligence and machine learning enabled devices and cloud-based services. The guidance also distinguishes between cybersecurity risk management and safety risk management, with recommendations for a risk management plan, including expanded content elements for a risk management report that specifically addresses cybersecurity risks exclusively. The guidance also outlines the requirement for software bill of materials in marketing applications for cyber devices, including identifying all known vulnerabilities associated with the device and software components. The guidance recommendation to analyze unique aspects and perform gap analyses of security controls and architecture, and provides a list of recommended documents for IDE and pre-market submissions. This guidance is not limited to devices that are network enabled or contain other connected capabilities. It describes recommendations for devices under all pre-market submission types that are submitted to the CDRH or CVER. Some general steps for device firms that they can take to assess and readjust their processes in response to the 2023 guidance include understanding the guidance's SPDF, transparency requirement risks, risk management distinction, SBOM requirements, and technology such as AI, ML, or cloud-based services. Also, it is important to conduct a gap analysis to compare your existing cybersecurity processes and practices with the guidance requirements and recommendations, as well as identify areas where your current processes may fall short or need adjustments that align with the new guidance. It is also imperative that the sites perform a risk assessment focused on cybersecurity, as well as identify potential vulnerabilities, threats, and risks related to your medical device and its software components. You will want to consider both your known as well as your emerging threats. It is also important to allocate resources and efforts proportionally depending on the level of risk associated with each gap. High-risk gaps obviously should receive the most attention. My thoughts around this guidance include the reminder that risk management for device manufacturers is essentially systematic practice of identifying, analyzing, evaluating, controlling, and monitoring risk through the product lifecycle to ensure that the devices they manufacture are safe and effective. The quality system regulation in 21 CFR Part 820 explicitly addresses the risk managed activities of 21 CFR 820.30. With respect to this guidance, the goal of the SPDF is to introduce a set of processes that reduce the number and severity of vulnerabilities in products throughout the device lifecycle, specifically related to cybersecurity. The guidance It is imperative in this guidance to review and update any risk management plans, reports, and submissions, as well as ensure alignment with the guidance's expectations. I would recommend that you focus on addressing critical gaps that pose the most significant cybersecurity risks to your medical device. For example, vulnerabilities that could lead to patient harm or data breaches. So what are some recommendations and considerations around this guidance? Well, this guidance specifically applies to the device constituent parts of the combination product when the device constituent parts present cybersecurity considerations, including software functions such as firmware or programmable logic. Keep in mind that IDE submissions have a different benefit risk threshold, and thus the specific recommendations for IDE submission documentation are provided in Appendix 3. Also, take note of the specific deadlines or timelines that are mentioned in the guidance for compliance purposes. You will want to ensure that your implementation plan aligns with these deadlines to avoid any regulatory issues. Finally, consider involving an external cybersecurity expert or consultant to conduct an independent assessment and provide you with an objective perspective. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is John Wax, and on behalf of the FDA Group, today's topic that I'll be discussing is FDA warns pharma firm over CGMP deviations. Let's begin. In March of 2023, FDA issued a warning letter to an active pharmaceutical ingredient or API firm regarding significant deviations from current good manufacturing practice or CGMP. Per the warning letter, FDA noted that the company had provided, and I quote, an inadequate response to the various observations identified during the firm's October 2022 site inspection. What exactly did this API firm do to warrant a warning letter? Was this response by FDA justified? In order to find out, as always, time to do some research. American Laboratories Inc., or ALI, is an Omaha, Nebraska manufacturer of enzymes, proteins, and flavor agents, primarily serving the food and nutritionals industries. Per the ALI website, the firm has been around since the 1960s and is in the business of taking porcine and bovine animal parts and converting them into a variety of constituent products. In addition to their food and nutrition business, the firm also manufactures glandular products, selling several API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, SKUs. It was hard for me to get a clear bead on the firm, but they appear to employ somewhere in the 100-person range. To be honest, talking about glandular products for some reason seems to make me a bit uncomfortable, if not a bit queasy. Nevertheless, we will still soldier on with this warning letter deconstruction. A check of the NDC list identified 3 codes for various thyroid USP concentrations, all sold as APIs. All 3 thyroid SKUs are porcine-based or thyroid powder made from the thyroid glands of pigs. Per the USP monograph, the powder is manufactured from, and I quote, collected thyroid glands previously deprived of their connective tissue and fat, which are subsequently dried and powdered. And once again, per the USP, the thyroid powder is then specified for the concentration of the 2 active constituents, levothyroxine and liothyronine. In addition to having the specified amount of these 2 constituents, the powder must also meet the USP microbiological testing limits as well. Let's dive into the meat of this FDA warning letter. Per the letter, the inspector observed that the firm A failed to demonstrate that the process can reproducibly manufacture an API meeting its quality attributes. B, the firm failed to establish procedures for investigating critical deviations or failure of API lots to meet specification. And lastly, the firm failed to ensure that API lots meet specification prior to blending with other lots, and more about this later. Let's first review the failure to demonstrate process reproducibility. Just a quick disclaimer, any proprietary information from a firm's warning letter or 483 is typically redacted, so it's not always clear what's going on. As such, I took a bit of poetic license and made some assumptions in this case regarding the letter's narrative. The deviations, or CGMP deviations, the inspector noted included the following. The original temperature mapping of the drying room was performed without taking into account possible variations of material quantity, and as such, both product overdrying or underdrying could occur depending upon the total mass at any time inside the drying room. The next issue was the lack of information regarding the drying drum's construction. The letter seems to suggest that variations in material, wall thickness, and other design parameters could impact either drying time or microbiological growth. The inspector also noted the lack of information regarding the specific quantities specified for each drum in the drying room. And lastly, the inspector also questioned the firm's conclusion of a 1 log or 1 order of magnitude reduction in microbiological load, employing retrospective or the firm's prior process data, given the fact that the inspector found lots in that data set that didn't meet the 1 log microbiological reduction. The inspector was also unsatisfied with the justification or lack of justification for the allowable and acceptable hold times between the various process steps. The second major finding involved the firm's inadequate out-of-spec or OOS investigations. To be fair, OOS investigation issues, that's something that even rock-solid pharma companies often struggle with. Per the investigator, inadequate investigation of OOS failures included microbiological failures during stability testing, customer complaints regarding ongoing micro failures as well, inadequate root cause analyses for various high concentration API lots, but without extending this investigation to allied or other potentially impacted API lots, and investigating multiple lots with the same issue, but with one conclusion to rework the lot and the other to reject it. The discovery of micro issues at stability really surprised me. That is not a place to do a poor investigation. Every pharma firm essentially hangs their future on those stability results, and that was definitely the wrong time to conduct a sloppy OOS investigation. The last issue of concern involved finished product testing and blending. Again, taking the narrative, I'm thinking that in order to maintain the 90 to 115% active ingredient label claim, higher and lower concentration lots would need to be blended. That's okay per the ICH Q7 regs, but it's critical that blend uniformity and 100% sublot testing is performed in order to avoid playing that guessing game for the final product's blend concentration. The inspector, however, indeed identified the lack of individual lot testing prior to that multi-lot blending operation. To the FDA, that's definitely not good. It's akin to a bartender first making you a cocktail and then tasting it at the end prior to serving it to you. The inspector also noted that after the original 2022 483 issuance, the firm had committed to testing each sublot prior to blending. Apparently, the firm only performed micro-testing for each sublot and did not perform the critical concentration checks on the active compounds prior to that blending operation. To make matters more intriguing, the firm performed this pre-blend testing on only one of the 3 NDC codes. And finally, the inspector noted that the firm had committed to collect samples for testing from the top, middle, and bottom of each production drum, but had no data proving that the entire powder-filled drum was homogeneous to begin with. So now that we've deconstructed the warning letter, what's really going on here? Well, here's my take, and I'm going to be looking at this from the 30,000-foot vantage point. This firm that's been in business for over 50 years has clearly made a success of essentially buying the corpses of pigs and cows and essentially deconstructing them for saleable parts. When I look at their product offerings on their website, my sense is that the bulk of their business is in the human and animal food and nutrition space, selling flavoring agents, proteins, and various enzymes. And it probably, at the time, looked like a good idea to, quote-unquote, relieve a bunch of porcine thyroid glands of their connective tissue and fat, and getting into the active pharma space. However, by doing that, the firm essentially and possibly unwittingly put themselves inside a vastly different ballpark, if not a completely different ball game. In other words, this move into the API space drove up the firm's technical, regulatory, and quality burden probably by an order of magnitude. And to be perfectly blunt, judging from the obvious missteps associated with Pharma 101 processing, it just looks like this management team just got out way over their heads. I don't know how to say it in any simpler terms. So the $64,000 question is, what would I do if I were their consultant? Well, the first thing I would do is sit down with their leadership team and ask a very simple and direct question. Does the profound effort and investment required to be in the API space make economic sense for your firm? Because if it doesn't, then don't make APIs. If the team's answer is yes, what would I do? I'd probably split the business and have the firm recruit a separate API team, a team that has the requisite experience to manufacture these APIs. On that note, one concern that I have is the ability to attract that kind of a team to the Omaha area. I don't know that part of the country, but relocating an API team from the bastions of pharma production in the I would say probably the East Coast, West Coast, maybe the Chicago area, well, it's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to be cheap. But barring that advice, my number one priority would be to hammer home a GMP and validation culture. I'd start with a end-to-end manufacturing risk assessment using something like a process FMEA tool, where for every step in the process we would identify all the potential failure modes, assess their associated impact and severity, and then put together a strategy to mitigate the high risks that were identified. Once I understand the risk, it's fairly straightforward then to put a roadmap together to install the right facility and the right processes along with the required mindset. I'd look real hard at their current manufacturing equipment. The firm may need to purchase pharma-grade drying, grinding, blending tools, talking full stainless, all with washdown capability, and that's not going to be cheap. Given the considerable micro issues that were identified in the warning letter, there may be the need for certain operations to be done in a clean room, and there also may need to have an upgrade to their cleaning and sanitization equipment. Given the issues, the end-to-end process will probably need to be reconsidered and reworked. I'm thinking that the firm will need to conduct a bunch of formal DOEs along with a complete IQ, OQ, PQ revalidation. And again, given the micro issues that were observed, the facility is probably in serious need for a solid cleaning validation as well. Next step, I'd definitely head off to their analytical and micro labs and see what's really going on in there. There was no information regarding the labs, but they may not have audited them given the issues they found in manufacturing. But my sense is their testing efforts may be as problematic as their manufacturing, and the firm may also be looking at a Boku test method validation bill to boot. Speaking on a personal level, my experience base has included working with very successful firms that were selling into industrial or food markets, and then looking to get into the higher margin healthcare space. Honestly, it's a really difficult act to pull off. For this firm that was probably successfully working to the food GMPs or the ISO 22000 food safety regs. The reality is that the management mindset and effort and dollars to jump to that ICH Q7 API compliance, as I said, we're talking about an order of magnitude, and I just not shocked in any way that this firm ran into trouble, certainly the trouble that they had not anticipated. My experience, the biggest cultural challenges taking that jump, well, one is the extent and expense of process, test method, and software validation, the documentation burden and the rigor of batch record review, the extent and formality of OOS deviation and CAPA work, and finally, fielding those really tough questions like, well, what other lots, possibly lots in the field, are also impacted by this problem or issue or CAPA? And getting used to those kind of questions, that's a really, really tough act. I hope you found the review of this API warning letter to be interesting, and hopefully time well spent listening to this analysis. And as previously stated, that whole glandular thing, well, that just got me going. I hope that you enjoyed the topics reviewed in this newsletter, and that you hopefully took away one or two solid points for consideration, or even for implementation in your corner of the healthcare space. My name is John Wax, and on behalf of the FDA group, I wish you all a good day. Bye.